You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks and Zach Bechtold. We hope you enjoy this week's show, and you can find out more about us by going online at beardedtheologians.com, where you can pick up a few t-shirts, listen to a few old episodes, and find ways that you can connect with us. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold. And we have a special guest on the podcast with us today, Reverend Joe Graves, who is a United Methodist pastor and church planter and a whole bunch of different things. But Joe, welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's such a joy. I'm glad to be here and to share and be in conversation with you all. Appreciate everything that you guys do.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. We're looking forward to getting to hear a little bit more about you and the things that you do. Would you share with our listeners, a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do?
Yeah. So, Joe Graves, of course, and I'm a United Methodist elder, and my wife and I planted a church. It was probably 8 years ago now, and that's really defined our experience in the last year. My wife and I are sort of in that category of serial entrepreneurs. Like, we can't stop starting things. I will say that the older I get, the more hesitant I've become towards starting new things, because over the last 8 years, we've helped launch a church. Now my wife's launching another church separate from ours, but out of it. And then we've also helped start a few nonprofits. And, now I'm in my 40s. I'm like, okay, maybe I can slow down on the starting of things. But right. Yeah, love starting stuff, love creativity. My life kind of exists in a couple places right now. I'm a pastor of a local church. It's an average size local church. We started it and it merged with an established congregation. And so we get to navigate a lot of the normal challenges that pastors have in church. We're a small congregation of probably average attendance around 70 people. But we're connecting with young families. And so I get to be at a church where my 9-year-old Finn, is able to grow up with friends, which is not something I got. I grew up in a traditional United Methodist church, where the church was really excited to get my dad, who's the pastor, because he had 7 kids. So I'm one of 7. And so we were their children's ministry, which, is not it's one way to grow a church, I guess, is to get a pastor with 7 kids, but
right.
It was fine. But like my Sunday school class, this is back when people did Sunday school, was me and my brother. And God bless the volunteer from the church who came every week to teach me and my brother. But that's what it was. It was me and my brother, as well as a few others. But generally speaking, it's just me and him. And so now I'm in a space that we're a small church, but we're connecting with people who are similar to us. People from all ages, but to be able to have a vibrant children's ministry and worship that feels a little bit more contextual to our community and is really meaningful. So I love where I get to serve, and then part of it is because our congregation really allows me to be fairly free. I do a fair amount of consulting and coaching with other churches through my local church. So it's not like a side hustle. I'm doing it with support from my staff and the board, and it's going to fund the ministry of our church when we charge. And so I work with some church planners and some pastors pursuing revitalization. And then I write. I love writing both fiction and nonfiction. So I'm working on finishing my novel right now. And as well as the book, The Progressive Planter, just came out. And then I have another book that I'm in conversations with my publisher on, hopefully doing either next year or the year after. So that's a little bit about me: pastor, creative, entrepreneur, love starting things and love innovation and creativity.
I love that. You mentioned your wife. Is she also clergy?
Yeah. So my wife's a United Methodist elder as well.
Awesome.
And we met in seminary, and she was a on-campus student, and I was an online student, but we both got scholarships, so we met at the scholarship dinner, and nice. The rest is, as they say, history. But we planted our first church together, and that was really difficult for a lot of reasons. And we planted a church. We had our first and only child. and bought a fixer-upper like in the same 2 years. And I don't recommend that.
Mm-mm.
That was not a good thing.
Right.
Our marriage barely survived. We're very transparent and open about that.
Yeah.
It was really difficult. She ended up stepping down and then interimed a few places until just a year or two ago,
Mhm.
getting the opportunity to plant another church. And now we work together a lot, but
Mhm.
we are pastors of our own churches. The reality is we both wanted to be in charge.
Yeah.
And as the guy in the room, people defaulted to me, and she was treated as a pastor's wife a lot. And if there's any people listening in the church, don't treat female pastors as pastors' wives. That's
Mhm.
super not cool. There was a lot of struggles there that we've talked about in a lot of spaces before. Being a clergy couple is definitely a challenge. But now that we are pastoring our own churches, we actually collaborate more than when we were pastoring. I would say we collaborate more now that we're pastoring our own churches than we did when we were pastoring the same church. If that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
and digging into a little bit of vulnerability we didn't ask you to do, so or prepare you
Oh, yeah,
to
absolutely.
do.
My wife
But
and I are very, very open about all of that,
yeah,
and we love to share it because whether it's talking about our neurodiversity, because she's ADHD and I'm autistic, which also played into our marriage struggles, or talking about challenges with church life or pastoring or even navigating conference politics. Like we're very
Mhm.
maybe too open, partly because of our neurodiversity. If you're familiar with ADHD or autism, I tend to be
Very.
very open, and ADHD tends to be very impulsive. So we'll tell you anything. Whether we
Yep.
should or not is someone else to decide.
Yep. My Vyvanse is kicking in currently. And it's like, don't say all the things you want to say. So yeah, no, I appreciate that, and Matt and I talk about that quite a bit, both on the podcast and in our personal lives. Of we can't talk about this stuff enough. The relationships that our families have with the church, layer clergy, right, and how hard it is on our families who didn't necessarily choose this or get a choice in it, and yet they find themselves moving around with us and doing the things, and then you throw the dynamics of a clergy couple on top of it, and it's a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a lot. So I
Hey,
appreciate you sharing.
have you guys watched? I'm sure your listeners have. Have you watched The Diplomat on Netflix?
No.
I have
Yeah,
not yet.
it's a great show. Kerry Russell, I think, is the lead,
Um,
and I forget who plays Hal, but he's a well-known actor. And it's a ambassador and her husband who used to be an ambassador, and they're both in politics, and it's all about their marriage.
mhm.
There's some we watch that, and it's like almost too painful. Like that's our
Yeah.
marriage in a lot of
You're like,
ways.
it's that right
Although I
there.
think we have a healthier marriage than them. I will say that if anyone was listening and watching,
Yeah.
especially in season 3. But anyways, yeah, it's very
Very
real.
good.
So, Joe, with your work in church planting, what do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned in doing that work?
Well, when someone sets out the church plant, and when we did it, I read as many books as I could as I had time for to prepare myself, and I spent quite a long season preparing. And one of the things you kind of see and you hear and speakers talk about is like just how it's hard and it's all consuming. And I heard one pastor say like, I'd rather do 10 satellite campuses than a new church start. Just like starting a church from scratch, so much harder than launching another campus or launching whatever. And it's like one thing to read that, but it's another thing to experience it. And I hate to lead with that of but I was speaking with a group of seminary students on evangelism and church planting, and I kind of was at near the end. I was talking and sharing stuff, and I just was like, yeah, so I don't recommend it. Don't you probably I don't recommend church planting to anyone, but I definitely think we should do more of it, and that's the conundrum of church
Yeah.
planting. It's really hard, and it's really time consuming, and people don't understand that.
Mhm.
I was just even thinking like I put off getting ordained because of the church planting journey. And like I was provisional elder. Became a provisional elder in the early processes of church planting, and then like I was consumed by church planting. So I actually used up in the United Methodist system. I used up like all of my provisional years, and then I had like one interview left to be ordained. And I think my interview people were like a little salty about that.
Mm.
Um, and I just felt like at the end of the year they did, and I am ordained now, but I felt like they just didn't understand. Like, no, you don't understand. Like, church planting was everything. Like, I
Mhm.
didn't, and I even tell people that now. I'm starting to do a lot of networking. Like, I wrote this book, and Abington picked it up, and then I was like, and I had interviewed church planters in my circle, but I wasn't really aware of what was going on in the wider world of United Methodist or mainline church planting. I was really kind of focused on how do you apply these principles in our local context. Um, and so then I was like, oh, I should probably go find out what other people are doing because church planting was just like this little bubble where you become consumed by it.
Mhm.
So that's not a great lesson to learn, but it's an important one. Church planting can be really difficult, and I know when I talk to church planters, one of the ways in which they're doubly hurt is when they give so much towards it, and then people don't realize how much they've given towards it. And I talk
Mhm.
to church planters a lot where they're just like they put so much of their heart and soul in it, and then the you know whoever is supporting them, whoever the conference or system is behind them, like just doesn't even really understand how much they've sacrificed to make this thing sustainable.
Mhm.
Along with just realizing the difficulty of it, I think one of the greatest benefits and what I learned from church planning is just this idea of ecclesial minimums. When you're able to start something completely brand new without any of the legacy of an established church, I mean, there's just so much room to play around, and there's so much room to rethink, like, okay, what is church, and
Mhm.
what do we want it to be? And so the church that you always dreamed was possible, you can just go do that, and you can
Mhm.
you have to figure it out, but you can do that, and there's no one really telling you not to, depending on your context. But
Right.
there's not like a local establishment that's saying, well, that's not what church is. And I was like, well, who says who? Let's
Right.
try. And
Right.
I love that innovation and that the ability to experiment.
Yeah. I love that too. I went through a bunch of years ago, went through path one, running through that to identify, is this who I'm called to be or not, right? Which I really appreciated about that process. And I find myself today, when I hear people tell me, "Ooh, I'm a church planner." Are you? Have you done the work?
Yeah.
Do you know what it takes, right?
Yeah.
And I my undergrad's in business and things like that. So knowing how and what it takes to start and run a business,
Yeah.
it's just like start planning a church, right? It takes everything. And yeah, uh, not just because you're in your 40s does change feel less fun now. You're
Yeah.
tired.
Yeah.
We're all
Yeah.
tired now,
Yeah.
because we did all of these things and we had energy, and now we know what it takes. And like that, it sounds fun, but also,
Well,
so when anybody self-identifies as a church planner for me, I'm like, really, do you know what that means and what it's going to take, or does it just sound fun?
yeah.
Because it is fun, but it's a lot.
Well, one of the catch 22s in church planning or any entrepreneurial endeavor is that the only qualifying characteristic to know that somebody's a church planter is them having done it before.
Right.
And so what I will say is people tend to like, and I was talking with some denominational leaders outside the UMC's tribe. I was hanging out with some Presbyterians, and they're like, well, we don't want to necessarily recruit people right out of seminary because I feel like they should have church experience first before they plant. And I said, I don't know. I mean, I understand the values of that, but there's the other side of the equation. The United
Mhm.
Methodist Church exists in America the way that it does because a bunch of, at this time, young men um, who didn't have families, who didn't have relationship ties, who didn't have kids to take care of, drove around on horseback planting churches. And there is a gift of being naive, and there's
Mhm.
a strength there. There's challenges there that I think proper support systems can fill in. But I lean towards the side of like if somebody's young is like I want to be a church planner, I'm like, all right, it may or may not work out, but let's do it while you have the energy because
Mhm.
believing you can do it really, having that sense of confidence that you can do it is probably one of the greatest strengths to
Mhm.
starting something new.
Yeah.
Because if you believe you can do it, if you believe you're supposed to do it, whatever other weaknesses you have, you'll figure out how to work around them. I found
Work
like
through
if you've
those,
got
right?
that internal drive.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and the
but
same
yeah,
thing, like how you equated starting planning a church, you don't have the traditions, you don't have the foundational things, right? You don't have the ghost or the golden cows, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
The people saying, "We've never done it that way before," right? No, you get to start those yourself. You get to put those in place.
Yeah.
And
And they get set pretty quick,
they
and we
do.
were
Yeah.
planting, we had our welcome table set up the first
Uh-huh.
week. And the second week we decided to move it. And I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure I heard someone say, but it's always been there.
But it's always been there.
Like 1 week? What are you talking about?
Right. And the same goes for clergy, right? When we've done it for a long time, or we've seen it, yeah, being in two or three different appointments and having a rhythm, then going to church planning. What are you going to do? The rhythm, right?
Yeah, exactly.
More often than not, and maybe with a little creativity or flexibility, but we tend to fall into our ruts and what we know and what's comfortable. So I don't disagree with you at all. Like, let's take our fresh out of seminary folks who have a little more time and energy and maybe less responsibilities or different responsibilities and let them run.
Yeah. No, church planting has typically happened like that. And,
Mhm.
one of the things that I think evangelicals do better than mainline, because I don't see this in mainline spaces, is they're really good at that sort of residency of putting a potential church planter in a recently planted church to learn how to do it. And we just don't even have the momentum or the places to do that. But I really agreed with what you were saying. Like, my only experience of Methodist churches were old, liturgical, dying faith communities. That was my experience. My dad was a United Methodist pastor in Northwest Ohio that served small, older congregations. I'm not saying there's anything wrong about that. I'm just saying that was my experience. And I didn't feel like that's what God was asking me to plant.
Mhm.
So I really felt like I needed to be at a church that reflected the kind of church I wanted to plant. And so I felt called to plant a church, but my first step was actually to spend 3 years at a church that I asked to be appointed at, which got me in a little bit of trouble too, because you're not supposed to ask for appointments.
Right.
More so now than then, but anyways, I was like, no, I want to plant a church, and I feel like this church has a model that, and then the senior pastor agreed.
Mhm.
And so I spent 2-3 years at a church in a college town that was doing a really great job of reaching the younger generation, millennials. And that was really formative because they were doing church very differently than the United Methodist churches I grew up in.
Mhm.
And that DNA gave us something healthy to then, we eventually kind of became our own personality, our own identity. We were always kind of independent, but they funded us, which was huge. But even more than that, they gave us all these intangibles. They gave us all of their membership class materials, all of their board manual, all of this stuff that reflected a culture that was similar to what we were trying to do. That was these intangible, on top of financial support, that made our church plan, I think, healthy from the start.
Mhm. The
So,
intangibles are huge, right? Like, I think that's, I think that's what I see a lot of folks getting lost in. Like you said earlier, talking to church planners and who have done it in the past and either aren't doing it anymore or kind of got burned out or disenfranchised or because the people who supported it or put them in that place didn't feel like they were appreciated. Like that's just I've heard that over and over and over again. And I don't run a very big church planner circle, but almost everyone that I've talked to that's done church planning and is now in more of a traditional church setting or appointment has said the same thing.
yeah,
Yep, I did it for as long as they would let me do it and then pulled the rug out from under me or told me I didn't hit the metrics or right, like they're
right.
just any number of things that hurt and are hard um and then you look at those intangibles of these things are huge and often not the resource we have in those settings. So we get to
Yeah,
those places after 3 years, we pull the plug because it doesn't look like somebody thought it should, right? And
right.
we're killing ourselves trying to figure this out when we don't have to recreate the wheel. Like, where's our Joes in the world we can touch base with and be like, what do you got?
Yeah.
What can you send my way?
I'd say, having a parent church is one of the things that sustained us on so many levels. And and it wasn't a large church. I think at the time, I mean, like, it wasn't a mega church.
Yeah.
I think they probably worshiped like 400. So, medium sized congregation. But they were a generous church and the pastor was generous. And that's the most beneficial and generosity beyond finances, a generous spirit. And so not only did they raise like $100,000 to send us, and gave that to us over a 2-year period, but after we were about to charter and the conflict rose right at that 5th year mark, which often happens in church plants, as things move from a church plant season to an established church, there's a real growing pain there. And we had this immense amount of conflict and right when we were about to charter as a United Methodist Church, most of our big givers left. And we lost $100,000 in funding in 1 month, annual funding, but the people who represented that left in 1 month. And we were close to closing, and a couple of things happened that helped us bounce back. And one of those was going to our parent church, who hadn't funded us in a couple of years, because they funded us, the first 2 years, and pitching, telling them where we were at and what we hoped to do about it. And they gave again. They contributed again and supported us generously. But even more than that, generous spirit, we would get cards from members of their congregation. And there's members of our congregation that still send me birthday cards with like money. Just like blessing, like just,
awesome.
Just that there's a spirit of generosity there that is just, I would say, probably one of the most generous churches I've ever met in regards to how they care for each other and care for churches. So those intangibles of like getting notes and people reaching out and asking how they can support and those are huge, because it's really easy to get discouraged in any church endeavor. And when institutions typically lean towards preservation, so their job is to be the sort of the bad guys and say, well, are you reaching your quotas? To really have people from other churches who can be supportive, and not, your relationship with them isn't defined on whether you're successful. Like our parent church would even say, like, even if this doesn't work out, like this was a worthy investment. And that kind of freedom is really beautiful. And that's the kind of generosity I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's always difficult. The ones that I've been around or been a part of, in some way, shape, or form, it's always been the parent church that has caused the issues, whether it's understanding of what the roles were. Maybe those weren't clearly defined or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of our practices that I feel like we've gotten out of, in a sense of doing that, is that we've not reminded our people that we are continually called to do those planting. There was a reason why, like if you look at Methodist history, there's a reason why there was a Methodist church almost every 20 miles. Like I come from Oklahoma. Like literally
Right.
There was a point where there's like a church almost every 20 miles. And we all know like there's reasons for that, but yet there's also some beauty in that they were willing to take those risks and do those things and start something and do good for the community. And that lasted for a season or maybe still going on. But I think there's some beauty in having that a healthy relationship with the parent church of saying, that like, hey, you're here to support us, but we're also here to support you. Like, I think there's ways that it can be a two-way bridge and not just a singular, hey, give us money bridge, which sometimes how that gets seen. But I think there's definitely some importance of having a healthy mother church or parent church relationship that is key. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is here is like, what are some things from the book that you feel like we can learn from that would be healthy for us? Maybe even not as church planters, but maybe those who are seasoned in the local church and trying to revitalize churches.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to say, the relationship between church plants and parent churches and denominations is very complex, and it can be really life-giving, which was mostly our experience. And then I've heard a lot of horror stories. And so I dedicate a whole chapter in the book about that. And I build a pretty simple matrix to define different relationships with parental advisory relationships, whether that's a parent church, a denomination, or even just the status quo, if you're challenging the status quo as sort of like a structure. And I use the gospel, and I use the example of Jesus challenging the status quo. And so there's a whole chapter dedicated to that I think is really practical. But when I work with churches on revitalization, I'm coming from the bias of church planting. And so the process we lay out in the book is the same process, very similar process that I've used to relaunch a writers community, which is a nonprofit that is not faith-based. So I'm the president of the Ohio Writers Association. It's an online community of writers who are from Ohio or ties to Ohio. We've got like 200, 300 members. We publish anthologies. We offer peer critique. And the principles that we've used to what this organization was kind of dying, and me with a team kind of relaunched it a couple of years ago. It's the same principles as church planting. It's community building, it's having a clear mission and vision, creating programming, that makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish, et cetera. Same thing for nonprofits we started, but also fundraising. A lot of the principles that I wrote in the book around getting your vision in front of people and inviting them to be a part of it, I learned from fundraisers, because that's all fundraising is talking about what you hope to do and how people can participate in it. So when I work with churches around revitalization, I really kind of walk through a relaunch process. If a church is healthy enough, you might be able to just grow, a little bit more organically. But I work mostly with small churches, and most of our congregations in Ohio, a lot of them we're talking 20 people left, and they've got a part-time pastor. Like, what do you do? And so the method that I really recommend is walking through that sort of similar. How do you treat that congregation like a launch team, and cast a new vision, restructure the role of the pastor and the laity so that you can live into that new vision, and then work towards doing outreach and marketing and evangelism that's going to help you connect with new people, and then essentially build towards a grand reopening. Part of that was based on our own experience. So we planted the church, and then at that 5-year mark, we almost closed, but we raised money to relaunch. We cast vision around that. And then we merged with another congregation that we were renting space from. And they had a few people left. So then we had a forever home. But we walked through our small community at that point, because we had probably dropped to about 20 or 30 in worship. We walked them through basically what I did when we launched the first time. And it was partly inspired by my DS. He was like, you did it once, you can do it again. And I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess we'll just do it again. So then we walked them through this launch process of like talking about what it means to reach new people, to be guest ready, all the things you would cover in a launch season. And then we had a grand reopening, and we literally called it a grand reopening. And we did a catalytic event beforehand, which I talk about in the book. We did a church party afterwards. And I was two things. One, it worked. And I was like, oh, good, this still works. And two, it was much easier the second time, I've found, once you've done something. So,
and I think we have that built in naturally to who we are as United Methodist, right? Like, we work in a connectional itinerant system, and if we do it well, when we change pastors, right? When we move and do the things, hopefully if I'm moving, I'm handing this off to the next person to do that very thing, to be like, cool, here's what we have in place. Let's run, right? Like, here's the mission, vision, and way forward. Let's have a grand reopening. Like, I think that's beautiful language. Even if we're not moving, I just started my 4th year here at this appointment, which I've never done. My whole career's been 2 and 3 year appointments for the last 15 years. And we got here a little more settled. My kids are older, so moving them is unreasonable. And they got us to a place where we could be for a while. And so we started a 4th year, and I had that thought back in July of, oh, I'm restarting. I've never done a 4th year anywhere. This is all new territory for me. But about a week ago, I had that same thought of, oh, it worked 3 years ago, what we were doing and how we approached it. Now we're building on that, and I'm starting with a foundation behind me that I know, and I know the people, and they trust me, So we're not starting from zero, but we're starting in a good way to really lean into what we've been trying to the last 3 years. It feels weird. It feels good though, but I hear that, in which I hope it works. It works, right? Like, and it feels good when it does.
It worked for us, but it reminds me of David's story with Saul's armor. It worked for us, but I was also like, this is something I'd done before, and it made sense for my personality, and it made sense for our community, which is some legacy church plant members. And so revitalization is so contextual, just like church planting. Like, you got to understand the community, but there are some real challenges. I mean, I would rather plant a church than try to revitalize one. And I think, and this is where, once again, my context, we're talking about a lot of churches that are very small, and the average age is over 70. I actually don't think revitalization's what's best for them,
Mm.
unless they really, really want it. I think once people reach a certain age, they should be allowed to just enjoy church
Right.
the way that they've always enjoyed it. And I think it becomes an issue of ethics for me, of
Mm.
forcing older generations to take on all of these new practices that are required to reach new generations in ways that I just think of this viral video that came out a while ago about an Alzheimer's patient who kind of woke up when their music was played
Yep.
and how much music holds memories
Hmm.
and provides life to people over a certain age. And then in revitalization work, we basically have to say, hey, this music is no longer connecting with the younger generation. We have to cut it all out and do something completely different to be effective. And I think that's actually true. That's statistically true. And I'm not saying you have to get rid of hymns entirely, but like maybe
Right.
there's some things that have to change culturally to connect with younger generations. And I just don't think that's always the loving thing to do for some churches. So I think revitalization is really hard and complicated. I've become increasingly a fan of sort of the church within a church or a grafting in model. I would love to, and this is kind of what we did with our church plant. We eventually rented space from an older congregation and then merged with them. But I really love the idea of these underutilized buildings being able to launch something new that's separate.
Hmm.
And when the time's right, you could always explore merging. But for those who are reached a certain age, like I hate the idea of taking away what they love. And we've had to do that in our context. So I'm not saying that we ended up merging our traditional and contemporary service, which were the services that reflected the two churches that merged. We brought those together, but only because the majority of the people in the traditional service wanted it. I was really hesitant because I think I don't know. I just think, I don't know, revitalization is tough. What I will say, going back to like the church planting conversation we were having, in my book, I argue that the United Methodist Church, and I would say mainline churches in general, the decline didn't start with a decline in attendance. If you look at the numbers, at one point in our history, like in the 1950s, the United Methodist Church was growing in attendance and membership, but the number of church buildings was starting to decline. The number of congregations was starting to decline. And that's actually the greater, and I think that's actually what's fueling the decline. At that point, churches were getting bigger during the church growth movement, so our overall numbers were good. But the number that people weren't noticing is that the number of congregations was going down, that more and more churches were closing, and we weren't starting churches. At that point, we still weren't starting churches to replace the ones that are closing. And now that, I mean, I don't know what percentage, but there's going to be a significant number of churches closed in the next 50 years. And we're not even close to starting new churches to replace them. Not even like people still don't even want to because of the territorialism that happens and the fear of change and fear of stealing people and stuff. So it's a tough, I'm not sure what'll happen, but I do think that now's the best time to plant.
Right.
For the sake
Well,
of mission.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just the last couple of years of the United Methodist denomination and the split and all of the things, whole swaths of communities, conferences, areas who no longer have a United Methodist presence, and we're not prepared to do that work, right? We're not prepared to go back into those communities and plant churches and do and be there and be the United Methodist presence that a community wants and needs. We're just, I don't know what we're doing. I don't know if we're hoping somebody will figure it out or I don't know. But that
Well,
should have been day one, right?
We've embraced fresh expressions, and I'm a fan of fresh expressions. And so that's kind of like a lot of eggs have been placed in that basket.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit of fresh expressions is it does open people up to new ideas.
Yeah.
And so our denomination, and I think a lot of conferences are like, yeah. And then other mainline, when I talk to like my Presbyterians or the Lutherans, like they're like, we want to learn more about your fresh expressions. Like they're interested in it too. And I think there's some real benefit there because it helps people see that there's maybe church that could be different. The other side of the coin, though, the other side of the tension that we live in is that fresh expressions are designed to be attached to established churches under the leadership of an elder or a pastor. And so I say, yeah, let's do fresh expressions, but we need new church starts that can eventually house fresh expressions.
Right.
Actually starting churches and having a process. So, I think our conference is there's some conferences that are doing great work, and I would throw West and East Ohio into that mix. Our bishop, I think in the last couple conferences he's been at, has Bishop Young has set the goal of planting 100 churches, and our conference, I think, East and West Ohio has the opportunity to actually live into that dream. But it's expensive and it's risky and it's hard, and it takes the willingness to invest in the funding, do the fundraising necessary to have those funds, and to invest in leadership development to identify those who might be called, and then properly assess and train and all of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yeah. What does revitalization look for you all?
It's similar, right? So both Matt and I are in the Mountain Sky Conference, which covers 4 states. It covers, 2/3 of the country, or the
It's
west side of
huge.
the country, right? Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, and one church in Idaho, right?
I spent a summer in Montana. Beautiful country.
It's great. And Montana's where I'm at. Matt's down in Colorado. And so same conference in 12-hour drive apart from each other. A whole state away.
That was mandated by our wives, by the way.
It was. And Montana especially, like I said, not very large churches. I'm in one of the larger ones that worships 150 to 200 on a given Sunday when everybody's not in a national park or hiking or skiing or doing anything else, and which is great. That's where they need to be. But most of our churches are under 50, and are in communities under a couple thousand, right? Like so, and spread out. And so revitalization looks different because of population, just like it does everywhere. It's contextual, just like you said. And so we're looking at what does it take to get you a pastor? Are they going to have 4 churches to be able to be full time? And 2, can we even get pastors to go into some of these places because they're maybe not ideal for them, or living in Eastern Wyoming's not what we all dreamed about doing when we signed up to be itinerant. However, or Eastern Montana or whatever, not everybody gets to live in Bozeman or Denver or Salt Lake City or,
Yeah.
name one of the cool places to live at our conference. And so it's interesting. It makes for an interesting, and we see the trend of that over the last 25, 30, 40 years as they sent whomever they could into the smaller churches because that's who would say yes. And you see that steep decline. You see a disconnect to the conference and the community, and just kind of holding on and hoping for what might be next. And then there's some really good smaller churches that are just crushing it. I had my first appointment out here at a 3-point charge, and church of 15 people and a community of 115 people. And they're like, the first time I met with them, they're like, "You're going to go sit in the bar and drink beer with people, right?" Yeah. Twist my arm, right? But they were like, "People aren't walking through our door. That's where they're going. We expect you to be there." Great. Let's do that. And they embraced that, embraced their culture, embraced
That's great.
who they could be in the community. And they worship 10% of their population, right? Like that's a silly number to throw out, but significant in a town of 150 people.
It's huge. If we had 10% of Columbus's population, I mean, it would, I don't even know what the numbers are, but what's 10% of 1 million or 2 million? I don't know. A lot.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's
huge.
And so, I make a lot of arguments around our conference of that's vital and important, and we need to pay attention to that. And that's a good appointment, right? Like, come on, colleagues, like jump on that. That's fun. That's the fun work we get to do when we're tired or when we're not tired and have some energy and can do community building, right? Like,
right.
So yeah, it's kind of changing that narrative, I think, at least in the Montana area, changing that narrative of, gotta go to Montana. It's cold, it snows, there's bears, and it's small, right? But not really. Like the people are great, and that's what it's about for me.
I love it. In the book, A Progressive Planner, I really, I define, success is such a tricky word. But for me, a successful church plant is one that's doing good in the world in Jesus's name in a sustainable way. And sustainable both means, financially, but also emotionally, relationally, like it's a healthy community. There's a healthy ecosystem that's sustaining it. And, a small house church where the pastor is a volunteer, bivocational, that's doing good in their neighborhood is successful. And if it can sustain, now it might not be sustainable because the pastor and the church is so small and they're trying to do too much that they get burnt out. And then all of a sudden that's not sustainable. But that could be more sustainable than a mega church where that ends up closing because the senior pastor gets burnt out and does something crazy. And so sustainability is so contextual. But when you think about revitalization, are we talking about being healthy in our context for what makes sense for our context? Or are we talking about being healthy in a way that maintains the institution? Because I'll joke with people. I'm like, look, I mean, the original church planner, Jesus, did it like similar to the circuit riders. I mean, he just lived off the land. He had supporters, but he was often homeless. And to be fair, Jesus only did that for 3 years. Who knows if he would have done that longer, if he'd been around. But that's one of the models. It was sustainable because the overhead was really low. But if your goal is to have a single church that's self-sustainable and can afford a full-time clergy with a full benefit package and a parsonage and a housing allowance, then your numbers are going to be very different than if you're working with 12 disciples in a community of women and, that are more nomadic. And so that's, institution doesn't allow for that kind of flex, but that's, I think, essential to, I mean, that's where, as Christendom declines and as the institution struggles, I mean, that's where we're headed. Is there are going to be people who God calls, and they're going to be living out their life and their ministry in very different ways than what the institution feels comfortable with. And it'll involve sacrifice and pain and stuff, but they're going to do it because God's going to get a hold of them. And I mean, it's really hard to say no to God when God gets a hold of you.
It really is.
Well, and I think to answer your question, like for me, what does revitalization look like for us? Like in this current appointment, I followed someone who was here for 18 years.
Wow.
They did not grow with their community like the community did. Like the community exploded. We're going to be pushing 100,000 here fairly soon. And we didn't grow with that community for a lot of reasons. I mean, we can point to all sorts of reasons why, but I really think my feeling and call has been here to steady the ship, to bring us back into more of a Methodist ethos of actually knowing what the connection is, knowing what it means to be United Methodist versus just being our own little thing, but also create some sustainability that is more at a healthier pace than trying to catch up, because there's no way in hell we're going to catch up. But if we work towards sustainability and we can work towards moving towards, mustard seed type benchmarks, not, oh, it'd be nice if we were worshiping over 1,000 and, the second largest church in Douglas County, Methodist church in Douglas County. We're not there yet. However, we are, the way things have changed in the last 4 years. We have definitely provided a presence and of a church that's going to love you and care for you no matter where you're at on your journey. But also, we're going to go out in the community as best we can with whatever resources we have available to do the work of the kingdom. And it's been a whole lot of fun. And I feel like there's been a lot of revitalization in our congregation. But I also know that, like, at the larger whole, while Zach is on the northern end of Montana, Colorado is trying to figure out what to do and be sustainable in a way that is not, in a lot of ways similar to Montana, but understanding that, like, how can we be our authentic, Wesleyan presence? I don't think we live into that as much as we should. And I think if we did, I think it would actually provide a lot that's needed in all of our communities. Doesn't matter where our Methodist church resides. I really believe that there's a beauty in Wesleyanism that allows people to connect with God in ways that a lot of other places don't offer.
Mm.
And I'm hoping we can lean into that a little more. There's a reason why Wesley went like faith by doing is kind of how I always say it. Like our faith that should be done by doing and not just sitting and consuming something on Sunday morning, but literally by doing. I think that's key. I think that's the key to, if you ask me what the key to revitalization is, faith by doing, but in a healthy, sustainable way and not trying to overkill or overprogram or all the things. Like I definitely think that's key there's a way to do it in a healthy pace and not just trying to do all the things in all the spaces, but to be discerning on where the Spirit is leading you with the gifts and graces that you have in your community and beyond.
No, I love that. And I think that that's often the difference between church plants and established churches is, especially when I'm coaching established congregations, one of the biggest hindrance to revitalization is the pastors are so busy maintaining their congregation.
Hmm.
And even just I think you shared about a congregation pushing you out the door to meet new people. I mean, that's just not a lot of people's experience. Like
Right.
I coached one pastor that had to do 3 or 4 funerals every week just because of the size of his congregation and how old it was. And he was trying to launch something new, but it's like, how do you even have time to go out into the community and meet people when you're preparing that many funerals
Yep.
and others who are just the constant drum of Sunday morning? And what I loved about church planting before we launched weekly services, and what my wife especially loves, because she put off like a Sunday morning experience for probably almost a year and a half, maybe 2 years before she launched her Sunday morning, because she just, once you do that, it's like that's all you. It just takes so much time
Hmm.
out of your week. But what we loved about not having that in our launch seasons was the ability to just have that extra freedom to go out and meet people and live our faith out in the streets, and or as Wesley did in the fields. And I mean, so much of that is lost when our day-to-day rhythms in the church are shaped around committee meetings and worship planning and sermon writing. I mean, all that stuff takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it does. And I always feel that this time of year, as we come up on our annual paperwork and church and charge conference meetings and things like that, of like, I've spent way more time than I really want to on this, because now it's affecting all the other things that I really want to do. That the reason why I want to be a pastor or feel called to be a pastor, right? Like, now I'm sticking my head in a computer and doing spreadsheets and reports and whatnot. Important, but also, you're right. It takes time and energy, and it's not always easy to recover that energy, right? And that time and be excited about the next thing, because there's end of the year paperwork coming, right? Like there's just stuff that we have to do that gets in the way. And it's reminded me in this season, like I said, as like coming up on the fourth year of how do I keep doing this one well, but take the opportunity to almost restart with some foundational elements at the same church of I need I need more lay leadership. I need more. I needed to do a better job of leadership development and things like that, either so I can hand off some paperwork, or so I can be like, I can't go do these things. Go for it, right? You have the gifts and graces. Go be there. Go be with this group of people, and in it doesn't have to fall on my shoulders, right? And which often happens in the church of 50 and below, right? Or even 100 and below. It's usually the pastor who's on staff. And that's about it. Maybe one or two other people, but how do we build that leadership development up better? And I'm just going to talk into the mirror of I need to do that, right? Like that's what all of this time of year reminds me of. We got to hand these things off so that there's health and growth and it doesn't live and die with us.
Amen.
Uh, and then we're not near as tired. Somebody told me I was more, that's known me for about 10 years. We went to seminary together. And she told me this week, she's like, you're more grounded now than you were in seminary. Like you got a lot of energy and a lot of things. It's like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I just need a nap. That's
Yeah.
all.
No, I hear you. The hustle will wear you out.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Joe.
likewise.
Uh,
Would you plug your book again for us and anything else that you'd like to plug?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone's interested, you can check out joegraves.org, and I've got my book on there, The Progressive Planter. It's a handbook for ecclesial entrepreneurs. Came out through Abington this year, and but there's some other resources. The book is geared towards church planting, but I think it's helpful for anyone who wants to revitalize or start a new ministry or start a fresh expression. It really is at the heart. It's practical, and that's really was the goal. I really felt like there wasn't a mainline resource. Evangelicals and Baptists and Reformed do a really good job of putting out practical resources, and mainline traditions are really good at critiquing and offering theological and abstract examination of ideas. And so I was really looking for something that was mainline, a little bit more open-minded, inclusive, but still very practical. So it could have been called The Practical Planter. It really lays out, here's how you start something in a meaningful way that's going to make the world a better place, especially for people who've been hurt by the church or have experienced church and are imagining something different or want something different. It comes with resources. So there's like almost 100 resources that you can download with the book. All of those things that I talked about, those intangibles, many of them I actually have edited from our parent church. Ironically, I was just thinking about. So thanks Central Avenue for that. But everything from job descriptions to reflection guides to strategy to checklists on marketing for events, just a variety of stuff that we've used and updated and made accessible with the book. So, and then I always love to have a conversation if anyone wants to talk. So yeah, joegraves.org. You can find all that information.
Thanks, Joe. So listeners, we'll have a link to his website in our notes, and so you're more than welcome to take a look at his stuff on his website at joegraves.org. And we'll be glad to share that for our listeners in the notes. And so, listeners, thank you for listening. As we close out on the month of Pastor Appreciation, you can still pick up an amazing piece of Bearded Theologians gear for your pastor, or maybe even a friend who's a clergy person, or even for yourself. If you need some Bearded Theologians mugs or shirts, we'd definitely love for you to do that. And then also don't forget, we have an amazing 9-year catalog of past shows of a whole lot of stuff on the beardedtheologians.com. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Subscribe and like this video. And push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.